My name is Camila, the creator of Let's Talk Miami, and I want to wish you all a happy new year. Today, we're starting off season two, the first episode regarding how are we going to tackle some of the biggest Miami problems we have. And we're talking with Karina Castrillo, who is a writer and the founder of Sincerely the Fact. And recently, she wrote a zine which is like a political pamphlet. I'm gonna let you, Karina, talk a little bit more about that and regarding how we can make Miami a true paradise. So, Karina, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Camila. It's good to be here. So basically, I wrote a zine. A zine is like a political pamphlet they used to pass in the 70s and 80s. They still do now. Basically, it's a few pages long. It talks about whatever political statement you want to make. So the one that I made is called 10 Ways to Make Miami a Real Paradise. It's actually on sale at Dale Zine and like another small bookstore in another part of the States. But basically, so a little bit about Sincerely the Facts. I recently created Sincerely the Facts. It's a platform to fact check the news. I created it during the election. I think to tell you a little bit about myself and the reason why I started getting so involved in Miami and in social justice issues in Miami is because I lived some time abroad. I was living in Paris and for a few years. And when I came back, I had all these plans that I wanted to have an apartment in the middle of the city. I wanted to, I thought that I could use public transportation to get to my job. And little by little, I started realizing that the metro was way too far from my house. The expense of rent was much higher than what my income could afford. Even though I had already a lot of experience in what I was doing, the salary still wasn't enough to afford being able to live here. And little by little, I just started realizing that we have all these like issues that make it so difficult for locals to live. And meanwhile, in Paris, everywhere you go, there's a bus, there's the subway, and you get around everywhere, and you're able to live in the center of the city, which people are shocked when I say, for 600 euros a month or 700 euros a month. And sure, the apartment is small, but you're still in the center of the city. That's not even a possibility in Miami at all. Definitely, I think you get like an efficiency outside in the outskirts for like 800 or 1,000
or 1,000, more closer to 1,000.
Right. And I read that the median rent is like 1,600 for Miami. So there are all these obstacles that locals have to combat to get through. And so I ended up having to buy a car, and then again, and the tolls to get to take the Palmetto to get to downtown, or to get to like beyond like Miami Design District, I think I was going. And aside from the tolls, it was like the expense of the insurance, and then the gas. I think I was spending like, I don't know, it was like 30 or 40 a week for gas. And then the tolls, I think it averaged around like 100 or 100 plus. And then I was paying like 170 or something for car insurance a month. So like all these things just to get to work. It's not even something that I'm enjoying,
Right.
It's like I'm working to work. It was ridiculous.
And you're stuck in traffic.
Yeah, and you're stuck in traffic for, an hour and a half or an hour, and then an hour back. And, so so I think especially like if you're in the metro, you can definitely, read or take some time to do some other project. You're not wasting your time in traffic. So those are some of the things that made me want to get involved in activism, in promoting things that would be solutions to these problems that all locals still face.
Right. Yeah. And how you say all locals here in Miami-Dade, if not all, the majority are facing these issues. And this is a great segue to talk about some of the problems that we're going to talk about on the show, which is how we have a lack of affordable housing, gentrification, and just the traffic congestion. So let's first start off with affordable housing. And you had mentioned that when we were having our back and forth talking about this episode, that according to the Florida Chamber of Commerce, about 15% of Miamians live in poverty compared to a national rate of 13.5. And so when you add the fact that on top of that, we don't even have access to affordable housing when we're dealing with this kind of poverty rate, it's definitely a huge problem, and it's something that needs to be talked about. So do you want to go ahead and start that discussion?
Sure. So basically, the problem that we have in Miami is that, the rents are too high compared to the wages. We have like an out of balance ratio. And we actually have like one of the worst income to rent ratios in the country. There are still some cities that have much more expensive rents and housing, but they do get paid more. I think that one of the things that we have that other states don't have is that like Florida doesn't have a state tax. So the only way for our local government to have any funds is through property taxes. So they rely a lot on foreign investors coming in and, investing in the land and buying property here. So we rely on that. And unfortunately, when you rely so much on foreign investors, the ball's really in their park. They're able to do whatever they want, and we're basically selling the land for very little. And when that happens, the issue is that these developers come in and they build luxury buildings instead of building affordable housing, which is what we need most of, because that's what most locals need. So you have a very massive amount of population competing for very small portions of affordable housing. Meanwhile, they have all these luxury buildings that are going up, and it's a problem. The city is I guess it looks great to have that, but it's not really helping us, and we're not really getting a bang for our buck when we're selling off the land and our people aren't able to live anywhere. So we have a huge homeless crisis. We have 1,000 people who are homeless, 2,500 who are living in shelters. And that's probably gone up since COVID, honestly. So I'm not sure of the number that was in 2019. And we have a large portion of the population that is not able to afford rent. Actually, I think it's
6 out of 10.
I'm sorry? 6 out of 10 that are cost burdened.
Right.
And so many are facing housing insecurity. They're like, one emergency away from being evicted. So
cost burden. Do you mind?
Cost burden is when you pay over 30% of your income on rent. That's what cost burden is, and a large portion of our locals are actually suffering through that. So
they're paying almost 40% of their annual income on rent.
Yeah, it's like 38%, I think. Yeah. We have work to do, to say the least. And I think it's important to kind of explore some solutions, which is why I wrote a few in my zine, but also I've taken some from organizations like Miami Homes for All. They recently came up with a framework to assist or aid in creating affordable housing for people. They want to have a fund so the government can build more affordable housing. They want to restore the affordable housing that we already have. But I think outside of that, there are also other things that we can do, which is, for example, instate a vacancy tax to those apartments that are not being used, maybe like snowbirds when they buy houses or units here and they're not living here, it's not their primary residence. I think that we can instate a vacancy tax. And according to Connect Capital Miami, they said that if you instate a 1% fee, a 1% tax on all the property values of, I think there are about 31,700 something homes that are in Miami, and that would give 98 million.
98 million that could be used for affordable housing.
Yes, exactly. To build more affordable housing.
Right. Mm-hmm. You had when you told me about vacancy tax, I was like, is that even possible? And you mentioned that there are some cities in the world that are actually using them, and one of them is actually Vancouver in Canada.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was quite intrigued to see what the result was, that they have over there a similar problem like what we have in Miami, that they had a lot of foreign investment from the Asian market, and
Yeah.
they had a lot of vacant homes, and they didn't have enough stock of housing for the residents. So they imposed a vacancy tax, which is that 1%. Although in previous years they had implemented other types of vacancy tax, but just putting in that 1% of tax, it reduced the investment coming in from Asia, which was, I believe, $1 billion, and in 1 year it went down to 300 million. So it had a quick impact, and I imagine that it also opened up the availability of housing. They weren't driving up anymore the prices because you had a reduced demand from the foreign
Yeah.
market.
And and I think that's something you can do if I mean, I know people like in the state of Florida, rent regulation, for example, is banned, which is something that you can easily change. You just have a referendum and voters vote for it to instate it. But I know that there are a lot of people who are strictly against rent control, even though so many states in our country, like Oregon has, California, New York, and around the world, there's so much rent control. But if they would not be, on board with rent control, then the vacancy tax is something that is not such a big change.
I do have a question though on vacancy tax. What would be the difference? Like here in Florida, we have the homestead exemption. So if you're a Florida homeowner and you have your first home, like so the house that you're actually living in, you can claim up to $50,000 to reduce your taxable value. So what would be the difference between a vacancy tax and not having a homestead exemption, because foreign investors aren't eligible to that homestead exemption?
The homestead exemption, though, is a tax break for property taxes, and it's not the same thing as a vacancy tax, even though I see what you're trying to say, because everybody has to pay property taxes. It's just that some people are getting sort of a tax break on some of it. But a vacancy tax would have nothing to do with that. It's just an additional thing, which so many other countries and counties and cities around the world have, and I think would be very helpful. And there's actually even another idea floating around. A lot of other cities have also imposed this, which is a luxury tax. And that would be taxing properties that are over the median rate. And that would also help us increase our funding for affordable housing as well.
So the idea basically is that you're using these taxes really to fund the affordable housing that we need here in Miami.
Yes, because we don't have things like state tax or income taxes for the state, and because our local government relies so much on property tax. I mean, there's no other way around it, unless we need to think about property in a different way, but these are just band-aids if you want to continue in a market economy that we have. When it comes to affordable housing, I think that we know that government does have to get involved, because the market's not going to do it themselves, and they're not interested in creating affordable housing. Like, developers are interested in making more profit. That's why they're investing. So we kind of have to work with what we have and see if we can incentivize them. For example, I know that you said in our exchange, like when it comes to the Magic City development in Little Haiti, we had made an agreement that they were going to include a certain amount of affordable units, and that they were going to have people from Little Haiti be hired in their workforce. And in the end, they didn't keep up their agreement, and they got the land, and they didn't come up with their agreement. They just gave like a few million to some fund.
31 million to the Little Haiti Revitalization Trust Fund.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where, like, so that helps us move on to the other possible solution to tackle affordable housing, which is incentivizing developers through speeding up permits or offering public land so that the cost is cheaper. But then we do have, like how you're saying, we've seen how that incentivization of developers hasn't really worked for us in Miami-Dade, and in reality, it's created like kind of like an elite class of where developers they're able to get away with doing what they want, make their profits, and homeowners that are usually the ones that are cost burdened, having to take the brunt of that cost because we're incentivizing developers, but someone has to pay. And in Miami-Dade, it has been property owners that are single family homes. So that's why when I hear that solution, I'm not really intrigued because we've already seen what the solution has resulted in here.
Right. Yeah. Honestly, I don't know the depth of their contract, but I think that moving forward or with other developers, I think that the contracts need to be binding. The politicians need to be stronger in their position and really demand that the things that they agreed on come through. And I think, for example, there's another development that they did it's called the Douglas Enclave by Astor Coast. It had 40 affordable units, and they were able to also, because they were giving 40 affordable units, they were able to get more airspace. So they were able to have I think it's 10 stories or something aside from the 5. So agreements like that, I think, where they both, the developer has an incentive and we also get something in exchange. Because 40 units is, I think it's better than nothing.
No, I agree. We need to work on with the developers, but like how you say, we need politicians that are going to keep the promise at the end of the day and not just give them you can just pay to this trust fund X amount of millions of dollars and not have to do anything, because then we're really not helping the major problem, which is where we really
we're not.
That stock, that availability, which moves us along to rent control, which you had mentioned is not it's not legal here in Florida. You can't impose control on a private business. So do you want to talk about how that debate of rent control in a capitalist and free market like it is in the United States, how could that help here?
I think that in many cases, it's never a total free market. There's always government intervention. And this would be one of the cases where the government needs to get involved. And I think it's totally possible. I think it's 36 OECD countries, which are countries that have a market economy. 22 of them have rent stabilization or rent control. So it's definitely possible for part of the city that can, say which pockets of the city have this. And it would be, they would still rise, but they would rise linked to inflation instead of linked to, whatever the landlord wants to charge for that year. So I think that it's definitely possible. And for example, in New York, there used to be much more rent control buildings, but as people move out, there are certain loopholes that landlords also have with rent control. But for example, right now, I think they have 1 million of the apartments in New York City have rent control. And honestly, it depends, because I know that there's a lot of talk of, does that really help people? Does it only help a few and then harm the landlords or whatever? But and that's definitely something that is up for discussion. I think it does more good than harm, but I don't know. I don't know how we go about implementing it here. I know that 2 Orlando lawmakers had tried to pass it, but Tallahassee said no. So we really have to get to, I think, and it's terrible to say, but I think that we have to get to such a terrible crisis for us to change our mentality. And it's unfortunate so many people would have to, endure, suffering from being homeless, to get to the point where they're okay, we need to get involved and we need to really tackle this and be stronger about this. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was I think that we really need to fix this issue before we invite more. I know that Mayor Francis Suarez talks a lot about making Miami a tech hub, and I think that's great. But if we look at places like San Francisco, where the amount of growth has really caused people to be priced out of the city, and they have a major homelessness issue. They have about 8,000 people on the streets, and 70% of those people were people who actually were priced out of their homes. They were living there, and the tech industry hires a lot of people outside of the state and to come into work, and that's fine. But I think that because there's so much competition, the rent prices skyrocket and people are forced out, and because there's not enough affordable housing, they had nowhere to turn to except the streets. So I think that we really want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake that they did, and also Seattle has that issue. I think we need to fix that before we invite more we don't need more tech headquarters here and bring all these this influx of population here when we haven't fixed our issues. And I really think that we need to get aggressive with affordable housing before we do that.
Right. And I guess also the debate on that, people would say, well, if you're bringing in these big tech companies that are paying people more, then you're giving them the opportunity to get out of poverty so that they don't have to rely on affordable housing.
Right. But the people that they're hiring aren't going to be the people who are low income. They're hiring people who and a lot of the times they're not people in the community that they're hiring. They're people that are outside of the state, I don't know, from outside of the country as well. So they're not hiring the low wage earners. Like, they're not going to be hiring people who are making 40,000. They're hiring people who have a certain qualifications, education. They're not going to be hiring the people who are already suffering from these things. They're hiring people who do not need affordable housing, never have. And that's not really, I know I get it. They're bringing jobs, but the jobs that they're bringing aren't for us. The same way that Magic City development is saying, oh, it's bringing opportunity to Little Haiti, but they're not hiring little Haitian, people from Little Haiti. They're not, putting them in their workforce. They're not giving them the shops and the dining that they have is not for their income. So that community is not benefiting from that project. And that's the same way that is happening with tech. The people who live there weren't hired. So that's something we need to think about before we bring them in, I think.
And on top of considering housing, I think we also need to consider, how do we develop our workforce that is low skilled and not making that much income? How can we develop them to get those jobs? Because they need certain skills that quite honestly are not being taught. And so that's why these companies have to rely on out-of-state or international workforce, because we're just not prepared.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we need to really focus on equal opportunity, but equal opportunity doesn't happen if we don't have equal education. And we don't have equal education because our schools are funded by property taxes. So if you live in a rich neighborhood, you're going to have a good school because you have more funding for that school. And if you live in a poor neighborhood, you're going to have, lack of teachers, lack of, computers, and it's not going to be the same. So we need to rethink how we fund schools, because everybody should have equal education. So they have an equal chance to succeed. And we don't have that.
And I was actually looking at some of the arguments against rent control, and I found a study from Brookings, and I was actually shocked to find out that San Francisco had rent control in the 70s. And they were actually saying that rent control contributed to the gentrification that we're seeing today. Because, like how you mentioned, rent control has loopholes. So landlords, instead of holding on to these properties that were rented, they decided to go out and sell these properties so that they could get the market price, or they would redevelop these properties into owner-owned condos. So those condos were now being tailored for a higher income, and which is what we're seeing now in San Francisco. So those kind of loopholes are there, and it has been shown that in places like San Francisco and Cambridge, Massachusetts as well. And it seems like between the 70s and the 90s, there was this debate that also came up with rent control, and it was imposed. But looking back, people have seen, well, the landlord has no incentive to improve or maintain the property. You have a misallocation of people, because now the tenants that did secure an apartment that had rent control, they're not willing to move, even though maybe they're living, they could live closer to their jobs, but now they're staying inside. And so you might have now someone that doesn't really need rent control staying in a unit that has that, while having a family living in a small studio, because there is no more availability of these rent controlled stocks. So it is something to consider when we consider rent control, that we do live in a country where private property it has been the foundation of this country, and many would say is what makes this country so great, that protection of private property, the fact that you're able to benefit from that through the free market. And so it is definitely a debate.
I just wanted to remark that I don't think it's the fault necessarily of rent regulation that they sold the apartments. I think that they would have, that in any time that they can make a profit, they always do. So like whether you have rent regulation or not, they're still going to be able to sell or not sell. And it's not necessarily because they're not making enough. If they can make more, they'll definitely always make more, whether that apartment building is regulated or not. When it comes to those people that have stayed in the home, I mean, that's hard to tell, like who needs it at what point. We're not going to kick people out to put somebody else in. I think that it really is just a need to create more, because the current situation in San Francisco is like definitely not working out. And if they don't put a price cap, I don't know how many more people are going to become homeless. It's really growing. It's from, I think 2017, it's grown 17%. There are more homeless people that are homeless on the streets. So
it really does lead to that.
Yeah.
To that topic of gentrification, because someone is getting left behind. You're not having enough people, not enough people that are able to afford houses. They're being left out of the opportunity to own a home. And we're seeing that here in Miami, where Wynwood used to be a place that, it was very down. It wasn't a place that anyone really wanted to be. Same with downtown Miami. And now you're having all of this development, but that comes with an increase in prices, and the people that were living in those areas, well, now they're priced out. So where do they go is the question.
Right. Yeah. And I think, if only investors were thinking of including the community, I think that gentrification would look different. But they're only thinking of making the most profit. They're thinking of, bringing wealthier, shoppers or tenants. They're not thinking of how they can, create something great for the people who live in that community. And if we came up with something that said, okay, you have to, if you want to build here, you have to take into consideration the character of the community, the income of the community, so that we could all benefit from it, because the investor will still benefit from it, but the people in the community will also benefit from it, and they won't be, priced out. They won't be, left out and pushed out of the community. So if we started looking at it like that, but unfortunately, like our mentality is like, it's different. So that's the problem with that.
And in that case, I agree, because the people that made that community affordable and also desirable now are being kicked out because they can't afford it anymore.
Yeah. And also when you gentrify a neighborhood, you're not, including the community, you're erasing the reason why people visit that community, why it was attractive first place, because those people who have been residents there for years make it a unique place, and you're removing that. That's why so many people say that San Francisco is really boring now, because it all looks the same. It all looks, there's no heart in it. There's no in it. Yeah, it's gone. It's all, I don't know. It's not special anymore. And I think that happens a lot to places in Miami too. And I would hate to see that happen to Little Haiti. Actually, every time I pass certain areas, for example, I really love South Miami. And now I see there used to be this plaza that had a bunch of little shops. One of them was like Misha's Cupcakes, and I think they had A La Reine and some other little stores on US 1. And now I see that all those stores are gone, all those shops are gone, and they're building something huge. So I'm wondering, okay, you're killing the character of the city. That city is more like village-like, walkable. They're small. They're 1 to 2 story buildings. I don't know what they're building there, but I just feel like they're killing small businesses too. It replaced with these mega conglomerates that are just and I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of the times that they make these massive malls, they're empty. Luxury condos that you see, like when it gets dark, like at night, and you walk around and you look, that there's very few lights on because people don't live there. I mean, you have like all this space and then all these people that are homeless, and you're like, why are you doing this? Like, it's not helping. So I don't know. I just think it's a waste, and I hate to see that. So
yeah, no, I completely agree in that case. And then I guess moving on from housing, it's the biggest nightmare of any Miamian really is our traffic. I think if you're Miami, you're like, there's like this groan that comes out of people. They're like, I have to drive.
I know.
So like,
yes, it's
like
so
how can we get, I think there is this interest of getting public transportation, but how can we really like push forward and just say, you know what, let's get this done. People want this. Like, how do we create that goodwill from our politicians or our community to get this?
Honestly, I don't know. I think this is a very and not to I think it's a very conservative state, and I think that now we have like a new leader, like we have Daniela Vincava, who is really on board with expanding the metro, and I think we need more leaders that think like that, and that also realize that this is good for everybody. I mean, this is good for everybody. This is not this shouldn't be like a political thing, because it really benefits all of like everybody, and it gets people out of poverty, because if you have access to your job you don't have to spend all these expenses of the car, you're able to get there. And so many people don't accept a job or are not able to get a certain job because they have no way to get there. And then actually just the other day I relocated to New York, but I'm kind of in between both cities. And I spent some time in Brickell in traffic of something that was even less than a mile. I think it was like 2 blocks, and I was there for like 30 minutes, and I was shocked and also the Metro Mover was right there. But I'm like, okay, great. There's a Metro Mover and there's Metro Rail, but that Metro Mover and Metro Rail don't get to West Kendall. It doesn't get to like all these other parts of city. So yeah, you don't have access. You have no other choice except to stay in traffic and waste time. Honestly, the way to do that is we really have to, and I think this is something that I learned from the French, but we have to be able to protest. We have to be able to know that we deserve better and that we should demand better. So many other cities have great public transit. Why can't we have it? We obviously need it. It would obviously help everybody, lift people out of poverty, connect us. And honestly, like, it's just, you don't have to use it, but it's great to have another option there. It depends on where you're getting to, but I don't know. I really think that we need to kind of be more vocal about it. And I think that it's actually, we are getting more vocal about it. I see so many organizations are on board for it. So many people complain. So many people, I think Miamians are finally demanding better. And so I'm happy to see that. But how to implement it, honestly, it takes a while, it seems.
It seems like a solution that just makes sense. We live in the 7th least affordable city in the world. I mean, we're after Hong Kong, Sydney, Los Angeles, London, Toronto, New York, and then comes Miami, in the most expensive cities in the world. And then we're ranked the 6th most congested city in the country, with drivers spending more than 30% of their time. So you have this, it kind of is like a solution that it's like, well,
it's like screaming for.
Yeah, transit is reducing. If you give us public transportation, you're reducing the cost of living, really, because you're not having to spend money on car, on parking, on tolls, on gas.
Yeah. Yes,
And
yes.
and we talked to Transit Alliance last year, and they were even saying, well, forget about the people that are driving. Let's talk about the people that are actually using the metro today and the bus system. Like they need
And
access.
getting late to work because the
Yeah,
bus
they
isn't
need
coming on
access
time.
to their jobs so that they can get out of poverty. So
Yeah.
it just seems like a win-win solution that
Yeah,
we just need to be able to connect this county better and not just have it available to certain areas of the county.
yeah. In the last video that I think Transit Alliance did, they were speaking with a few commissioners, and they were saying, well, you know, they were for obviously expanding the metro and stuff, but they were saying that the way the city is built is, you know, it's for a car culture, and we do have a car culture here, speeding and all this stuff, but it's actually it's a very dangerous city. I think we have the highest rate for bike deaths. We obviously also need more bike lanes for people to be able to, you know, bike safely. People still bike, but it's still extremely dangerous. And I just think that it would save a lot of lives, because we have a very high rate of accidents, which is why we also have, you know, the car insurance is so high. So I think that fixing the public transit issue would be great on all fronts, because you'd also even avoid accidents on the expressway and streets and all this. So
I completely agree. Even from a capitalist viewpoint, it just makes sense. You would
well, it really does.
quality of life, really.
You're getting people to their jobs.
Yeah.
you're lifting people out of poverty. Honestly, it's great to, like, I love New York City because you can be in the, I don't know, any corner of the freaking city, and you have the subway right there, you have the bus right there, you can get anywhere, and it connects you to people, it connects you to even work connections. You know, this is silly, but I took the bus to a park, and a park that wasn't near my neighborhood, and I met someone at the park who was the designer of the book that I was reading. You know, it's like you meet people from all walks of life, and that's good. We need to mix. It shouldn't just be, you know, you have this wealthy neighborhood and this like low income neighborhood and they never talk. Like, no, we should all be mixed. So I think that, yeah, we need to be, I think it's really great. And I think that's why maybe places like Europe look so egalitarian, because that they have that mix. It's not so, you know, I would definitely say that we need to avoid to look something like Brazil, where you have like, you know, yes, exactly. Like a wall separating yourself from, you know, the rest. That's insane. I really want to avoid that. And and it sucks that we have that differentiation here. I think that public transit would definitely help make us, you know, more connected.
Right. No, I agree. And I think these are topics that we need to keep in mind as we continue to grow as a city. It's kind of crazy to think that we still have potential to grow, but we really do. And it's just a matter of growing in a smarter way. I think everyone agrees that the way we've been growing has been great, but it's not sustainable for the future. There is something as climate change, and we're all witnesses to it. And we need to think about how can we make our society more accessible to everyone, more equal, and really everyone at the end of the day just wants to be able to fend for themselves and have an opportunity to grow, I think.
Yeah, that's what I always say. Like, people aren't asking for much. People are just asking to be able to do it on their own, but they just need a few things to work. You know, I really don't think people are asking for much. And I think it's fair to really make an effort to really improve the city, because like I said in my scene, it really could be paradise. We are sitting in the most beautiful place. Like, it's gorgeous, and everybody should be able to enjoy it. It shouldn't be, oh, I can't go there because the parking is too expensive. I can't go there because it's too far and it costs me money. Like, it should not be that way. You know, it should be accessible to everybody, so everybody can enjoy this.
I agree. So with that, I'm going to close off the show and ask you, how can our listeners connect with you if they have any questions or just want to follow you?
Sure. They can follow me on Instagram at Karina in the City. I also have my platform at Sincerely the Facts. And you can find my zine at Dale Zine.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. It was so great to finally meet you.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good one. And
Okay.
everyone else, thank you so much for joining the episode. And please let us know what you think. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and follow. Thank you all so much, and see you on the next episode.